Hi everybody, welcome to the first City Cloud Masterclass. I'm Oskar, I'm the marketing manager here at City Network, and with me today I have Tobias Johansson. Welcome, Tobias.
Thank you.
Tobias is one of our cloud infrastructure specialists who will tutor this class. So in this series of classes, we're going to take you through everything there is to know about City Cloud. And to get you in that cloud mind, Tobias is going to start off today by showing you some of the basic features of City Cloud OpenStack. Now, before we get going, Tobias, I have a couple of questions for you. So, why do you think that people should start using cloud services?
Well, basically, there are many pros and cons. There are many pros to going to the cloud, especially if you're going from a shared hosting like a web hotel or something like that. There are many differences, and the biggest I should say is that you have everything in one place. So you have a control panel, you have a management system to collect all your services. So you don't have to spread them around, and you don't have to wonder what you're actually using. So you have everything neatly connected in one control panel. When you are hosting something in the cloud, you get what you pay for. You pay for the actual hardware that you use. So in a way, you get more cost effectiveness since you don't have to actually use or pay for more than you have use for right now. So that is some of the pros. But also, when moving to the cloud from like a shared hosting, you also need some basic knowledge about configuring and hosting your own Linux or Windows environment. So there are some things to consider.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. All right. What do you think are the main differences between using the cloud and using traditional hosting services, such as like dedicated hosting?
Yeah.
If you
Well, the dedicated services have some pros in consideration to the actual effectiveness of the server and how much you get out of the server, so to speak. Because in a dedicated server, you get all the storage is locally based on that specific server, so you get some better performance in regards to I/O, and could be considered when you have actually some SQL or whatever that is highly dependent on I/O. But in general, you get all the same performance in the cloud, and you get, as I said, it's all collected in the one spot. So it's easier to connect different servers. It's easier to connect things that you have an interface to help you do that. Those are the bigger differences.
Okay.
Yep.
So, but there are a multitude of different cloud providers out there. What do you think makes City Cloud stand out?
Well, since City Cloud is based upon OpenStack, and OpenStack is an open source platform for hosting shared or public or private networks or hosting providers. So since it's built on OpenStack, you get a lot of features that is included in the OpenStack. So you get network management, you get VPN. There are a lot of functions inside OpenStack that we have included in City Cloud for you to use from the control panel. So that's the biggest difference from a lot of our other hosting providers.
Understood. Understood. All right, so I'm gonna get off the mic now and let you demo City Cloud and the features that we have in City Cloud. So please take it away.
Yep. So this is what you get when you log into the City control panel. This is our dashboard, and it's our cloud management system. It's a way for you to easily manage all your systems and all your controls. So the dashboard, it's an overview. It's a basic overview of allocated hardware, cores, memory, and disk. You also get a short view of your monitoring services if you have any, and some basic information for your account. Inside the City control panel, you have controls for all your systems. So you have servers there. This is where you can list, create servers, private images if you have to. You can upload an image from internet, and you can manage your snapshots. You have virtual networks in the network tab. It's the way for you to manage your internal networks. It's also a way for you to manage your floating IPs, your external IPs to connect to the internet. VPN. On the storage tab, this is where you find your block storage volumes and object storage. That's Swift in OpenStack. As I mentioned earlier, you have the monitoring system. It's a way for you to monitor a service based upon uptime and load. So you can manage HTTP, HTTPS, or ping. Wait, let's start with the most basic function. Let's start the server. So I go to the Create Server tab, and I name my new server. Let's call it Marston03. And the zone is all the data centers available for you to create your new server. So let's just choose the one closest to me. It's Karlskrona. And then I'm gonna choose all the preferences and all the configuration that's needed from City Cloud to actually create the new server. So I choose an operating system. In this case, I'm gonna choose Linux and a Ubuntu. And I could, if I wanted to, I could choose to boot from a private image if I had one uploaded, or a snapshot from a previous server. The images are the ones that's uploaded from our side. Then I can choose to select some extra packages to be installed once the server is created. It's an easy way for me to include some extra packages that I'm eventually need to install anyway. So I could install a lamp stack, for example, if I'm gonna host a website. And then I'm gonna choose how much hardware the server will allocate. So as I'm gonna start a web service, I could choose 2 gigs of RAM and 2 cores. And the volume size here is how big the system disk is going to be on the server. Generally, it's best practice to choose a smaller size for the system disk, and for any data stored on the server, it's better to put all the data on a volume of your block storage volumes, and then attach that volume to the server. In that way, if something happens to the server, you can always just start a new server and detach and reattach the volume to the new server. That way you can easily get a new server up and running if something happens to the old one. Basically, the first created network for you is default, so it's created from City Cloud. And if I want to access the server from internet, I would also need to create an external IP for the server. It is also selected the default security group. It's also created from City Cloud to start with. I can choose whether or not I want disaster recovery on the server. Disaster recovery is a good feature to have, where every night the server is backed up or copied in its entire structure. So it's not just the data, it's a configuration for the server and exactly the way it looked at the time of the copy. So it's a way for me to roll back the server in a later time if something happens. I choose a username. And I hit create server. Once the server is done and up and running, it will also allocate that floating IP I told it to create. There we go. And besides, when you expand the server view for this server, I have some extra tabs here that can help me manage this specific server. So the first one is called server info. It's for me to actually see how much hardware it's allocated and what operating system it's running and on what network it's currently connected. I have a tab for modification, so it's a way for me to modify the allocated hardware. So I can, at will, I can change the hardware allocated. So if I, let's say I have a lot of visitors on my web page, or my application is running slower, it might be time for me to actually upgrade it to some extra power. So let's do that. And when I pull the sliders and press save, it's telling me that it needs to reboot once it's done. So beware of that, and I press OK. Once it's done, I will need to go back to the server info tab, because once it's resized, it's also needing me to verify that resize. If I do not go back here and confirm the resize, the hardware will stay the same as it was before I initiated the modification or the modifier. So I press confirm. And now instead it's running on 4 cores and 4 gigabytes of RAM. The third tab here is called connect, and it's a way for me to connect to the server using our built-in vNsec console. So let's say I cannot connect to the server using SSH or RDP because of something is wrong with the server, or I have some connection issues. As long as I get to the control panel, I can just log in here, go to the vNsec console, and I can start troubleshooting without having access to the server using SSH, for example. I also have a tab for graphs. This is a collection of the last hours of CPU utilization or network. Right now it's empty since the server is new. I also get a collection of snapshots. If I create snapshots for my server, which I will talk about in a minute, they are collected here. I have a cost tab, and it's an estimated monthly cost for how much the hardware and the entire server is going to cost you at the end of the month, given it's up and running for the entire month. And the last tab is called disaster recovery. So as I said earlier, the disaster recovery is a way for me to roll back the server in case something happens, but it's not rendering the snapshot unnecessary, because the disaster recovery is a way to roll back in case something really happens. It's taken on the fly and in the middle of the night, so it's an exact copy of how the server was looking at that specific time. So configuration, data files, everything. So let's talk about some of the features or some of the functions you have here. I previously mentioned private images. I could upload a private image from internet, so I can name it and I can choose a location. It needs to be an URL, so you need to have somewhere to collect that image and create it. So this is a way for me to choose another operating system if you don't find the one you like in hours, or if you have a specific configuration already done previously, you can upload it here. The Snapshot Service is a way for me to manually make a copy of the entire server and the configuration for it. So it's a lot like the disaster recovery, but it's on my preferences. Like, it's done when I want it, and when it's done, the server itself is closed down properly, and the entire data and configuration for the system disk is copied in its whole. So it's not done like the disaster recovery on the fly and when the server is running. It's in a more controlled way. We have security groups. It's basically a way for me to create rules to allow or deny access to a specific group of servers. And the rules itself look a lot like firewall rules, like IP tables. But it's not on a specific server, so it's easier for me to manage access to several servers instead of having to configure every specific server for access or deny. I have the possibility to upload my SSH key right into the control panel here. So if I want to create a new server, I can let CD Cloud copy my SSH key to that server for me. And it renders me the ability to log into that server using my SSH key and not having to use the user data that I provided when creating the server. So that's a nice feature. I want to touch on the floating IPs in the network tab here. In OpenStack, the floating IPs is just a name for an external IP. So the external IP that I connect to my server or my load balancer is a way for me to access that specific server or load balancer, but the name floating only indicates that I can do with it what I want. So I can connect it to a specific server and then can disconnect it from that server and connect it to another server if I want to, making it possible for me to use a specific IP for several servers if I want to, or makes it easier for me to handle services in case I have DNS pointing to a specific IP. Load balancer is something we're going to touch on later, so I'm not going to speak about that. The volumes is, as I mentioned earlier, it's best practice to create a volume for your data and move that data along if you need to create a new server or if you need to create a new configuration maybe and you need to keep the data. You can create a volume right here and then you can connect it to that server. So I choose the same data center as I used for the server, and I name the volume. I choose how big it's going to be, and if the volume itself is going to have disaster recovery for volumes is working just the way disaster recovery does for servers. Then I create it. Once it's done, I can press the cogwheel on the right and attach volume. I choose my new server and attach. There we go. Now this volume is connected to my master 03 server, and that server will recognize the volume. But it's only there for you to configure, so it's not mounted on the file system or anything like that. But if it's a Linux server, you can log on to the server and create a mount point and mount it. And if it's a Windows server, you need to do that using the disk manager. I also shortly want to show you that even the volumes itself has snapshot ability. So, and when I have created a volume, and I can create a snapshot of that specific volume as well. So it works pretty much the same way the snapshot does for a server. It creates a copy of that volume exactly the way it is, and that can later on be used to create multiple volumes with the same data or for backup purposes. that was pretty much everything I wanted to show you. So let's start wrapping this session up.
All right, thank you so much, Tobias.
Thank you.
So that wraps up the first City Cloud Masterclass webinar in this series where we're going to teach you the ins and outs of City Cloud OpenStack. Thank you so much for joining. The next episode will be about load balancing, and that will be on February 23rd. See you then.